When award-winning screenwriter Elan Mastai wrote his first novel, the buzz about it led to a bidding war among publishers, and then another bidding war for the screen rights. So what's all the fuss about? A captivating utopian and dystopian trip through time that features a masterful exploration of modern life and the choices we must make. The book is called All Are Wrong Todays. It's written by Elan Mastai, whose work you may know from his most recent film, The F Word, and it brings him to our studio tonight. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's really nice to meet you. What a book.
Oh, well, thanks.
What a book. In your acknowledgement, you write that in my grandparents' house, there was a low shelf lined with battered old science fiction anthologies from the 1950s and 1960s. Did they inspire this book?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a kid, they really captured my imagination. Not just the stories inside, all these kind of classic, wild science fiction stories, but even like the imagery on the covers, you know, these sort of garishly painted scenes of futuristic cities and robots and mad scientists. It just really captured my imagination. I loved staring at them and sort of imagining these worlds. At the same time, as a kid in the 1980s, I was aware that the future wasn't turning out exactly as these writers and artists imagined. You know, we didn't have flying cars. I didn't get a jetpack for my 10th birthday. You know, we went to the moon and we didn't go back. We didn't decide to build hotels there or anything like that. So I was just really fascinated by that idea of the future we didn't have and what went wrong. And I feel like that kind of really crystallized for me with Expo 86. I grew up in Vancouver, and Expo 86 was a huge thing. It was a big thing for the city, sort of Vancouver feeling like it was suddenly, finally on the world stage. And it was part of that legacy of World's Fairs, you know, Expo 67 in Montreal, the New York World's Fair of 1964, and the sort of very optimistic, kind of wide-eyed, technology-forward vision of the future. And I loved it. It's only recently that I looked back and kind of researched the World's Fairs when I was doing this book, and I realized that Expo 86 is actually the last World's Fair ever hosted in North America. It's like we had that one, and then we kind of stopped dreaming of the future in that way. Our imagination and our visions of the future got a lot less optimistic, more cynical, more dystopian.
Do you think about why that is?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. I wrote a whole book about it. I think there's a bunch of different reasons. But I think a lot of it is that from the 1950s and 60s, you know, coming out of the post-war, there was a sense of, you know, humanity can meet any challenges collectively with our technology and our ingenuity. We can solve any problem, and we're going to continue to do that, right? That, you know, the sky's the limit, literally and figuratively. I think. But through the 1970s and 80s and 90s, it became more and more clear that what we were doing was affecting the planet. And it wasn't that we could just keep transforming at creating technology, burning off resources for the planet with no consequences at all. And that awareness, and also the debates around that awareness, how much you believe that, how much you don't, how significant you think the science is, how much you dismiss it, those debates, which got more and more heated as the planet got more and more heated, I think really changed on a fundamental level the way people saw the future. The future wasn't necessarily going to be just a continuation of the kind of suburban consumer paradise of the 1950s, which is what those World's Fairs were fundamentally selling.
But in this world, though, the 2016 of the future that we imagine in the 50s and 60s, it is consumerism, like everybody's buying things. You don't really have to think about what you need because it's already met that need.
Yeah, I like the idea of imagining an alternate version of the world, because the book, when it opens, it's not the future, it's right now. It's 2016, 2017, but it's this idea of the 2016 that people in the 1950s thought we were going to have. And I wanted to sort of embrace the optimism of consumerism, that idea that, because what I was thinking about was, here we are in 2016, and there's a lot of problems in the world, obviously. Technology has not solved all of our problems. At the same time, whether it's in terms of gender and race or sexuality, class, things have changed. Clearly not solved by any means, but there have been advancements, there have been big changes, but they came about through really tempestuous ways, you know, like social clashes, you know, our society asking profound questions and not coming up with answers that everybody agrees to. Through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s and 90s, it's been a very difficult, tumultuous process. I sort of, as a thought experiment, wondered, though, there have been another way we could have got there? Rather than the sort of all the clashes that happened over the decades, as well as the suspicion of authority, the skepticism towards government and corporations. What if consumerism had been a way to achieve equality? That idea that if everybody can buy a product, everybody's equal. And I thought that was an interesting way of imagining a future where people trusted the government, people trusted corporations because they hadn't been given a reason not to. And that consumerism became a way of achieving equality. Now, would that mean that all problems were solved, that there weren't things lurking underneath the sort of glossy surface of an equal society? No, of course, we're people. There's always going to be contradictions. But that was a starting point for me as I sort of imagined this utopian future.
And you said the story as well as your most successful film, The F Word, in Toronto.
Yeah.
What does Toronto offer your story?
Well, I live here. That's the first thing, and it's my city. And Toronto has grown dramatically. I don't just mean in terms of size, although it has in terms of population and size, but it's just developed as a city. You know, I think it's really become much more interesting, vibrant, culturally dynamic. It's become more international, and it's sort of, I think the confidence of the city has grown as well. And so for me, I just wanted to write about the city that I live in. The book mostly takes place in Toronto, both the Toronto of the sort of alternate reality and our Toronto right now. It does go to a few other places, San Francisco and Hong Kong, but for me, I just wanted to capture the city that I live in the moment that I'm living in it. And because I feel like the more specific and local you are, in fact, the more universal your story becomes. You know, I think that through specificity, you become more universal because readers don't live in any town, some sort of nebulous, unnamed metropolis. They live in real places. And so when you're specific about the streets, the locations, the feel of the city, it actually, even if you're not living in Toronto, it makes it feel more real to you.
And you could see yourself there.
Yeah, and then, you know, also, like, I'm Canadian, I live in Canada, I live in Toronto, so I like to write about the place I live in.
And you chose a utopian future over a dystopian one. Why?
Well, first of all, I mean, I love just the fundamental question, what if our world, what we think of as the real world, this place we're living in, what if this is already the dystopia? You know, what if this is the worst case scenario? What if this isn't the way it was supposed to be? How did we get here? To me, there is a lot going on in dystopian literature, or pop culture, or movies right now. Dystopia seems everywhere. I was interested in thinking about the real world, because the thing about a dystopia is there's a certain sort of sense of futility to it. If everything's gone horribly wrong, what can we do?
And what's the point?
What's the point? It encourages a sense of fatalism, like we can't control anything. There's nothing we do matters. It's all so horrible. Why even try?
And you go there later on in the book.
Later in the book, yeah. But I wanted to start in Utopia, a place where it's not like there's no problems, but a lot of the big problems that humanity continues to face have been solved. And I thought that was an interesting place to start, but then to kind of come to the same question from another angle, which is putting aside the futility and despair of a dystopia in an optimistic, positive, successful version of our world. How does personal responsibility feel? You know, in a world where if you make a mess, a robot maid will literally come and clean it up for you. How do people grapple with their responsibility, finding their place in the world, a sense of meaning and purpose and happiness? And in fact, is our sense of meaning and purpose and happiness undetachable from the complexity of real life?
And Tom's character, one of his friends, poses that statement to him and said, do something.
Yeah.
Like, contribute to the world in some way, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get too much into this story.
No, it's okay. I understand.
So
I mean, these are the interesting these are the questions. I mean, I'm trying to write a very entertaining, fun, propulsive, page-turning book, but these are the sort of the underlying themes and questions, not that just the book is posing, but the character's grappling with.
Consumerism, we talked about that a little bit. It drives the Utopia in 2016, and technology caters to our every whim. Everybody seems happy, with the exception of Tom.
Right.
Why is that?
Why is everyone happy, or why Tom isn't?
Why is everybody happy, and why isn't Tom?
Well, I think that the vision of the future that I sort of like write out, and I refer to it as like utopia, but I think it's for the reader to decide if it's actually utopia. It's certainly the people who live there think it's utopia. I like the idea that it's based around consumerism, and consumerism says that as long as you can buy in, everybody's equal. It also says that you are the center of the universe. Your desires, your whims, your wants, your taste, your opinions, that is the most important thing. And a hyper-accelerated consumerism, like like that version of the world has. It's when you walk down the street, the advertising shows you things that you want. You know, your clothes.
So it's like a bubble, like a bigger bubble.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's sort of like an acceleration of what a lot of people live in today,
Right
which
now
is,
with the news, right?
you know, they spend their time on their phone. The bubble is the phone, right? And so I like that idea of you know, we have these phones that we carry around everywhere, and there's a sense of like what happens on the screen stays on the screen, you know? Now you see in something like the most recent election in the United States, well, what happens on the screen doesn't stay on the screen. You know, what happens on the screen can in fact play out and affect lives in profound ways. But I like the idea of that image of a you know, you sit on the subway these days and everyone's just like this, right? So imagine that bubble being the whole world. And there would be positive and negative things about that. You know, the positive thing about it would be like, you feel like you're the center of the universe, everything is made to your taste.
So do you think that's what people want?
Yeah, I think some people would be delighted if every meal they ate was like genetically coded to their taste buds, and that whatever they felt like wearing that day could be, you know, there'd be a system in their house that would, you know, print out clothes for them to wear, that, and then if they changed their mind at lunchtime, they could just recycle their clothes and get a new shirt. I think that would be great for a lot of people. I think that the cumulative effect on society would probably not be great. But that's why individual whim isn't given free rein over society, right? I mean, part of being in a society is that there is a balance. It's not just what you personally happen to selfishly want right now. And I think for Tom, he doesn't quite fit in that version of the world. Why doesn't he? What's different about him? Well, I think part of it is his relationship with his father and mother. I think that's something that sets him apart. His father is incredibly successful. He's an inventor, a scientist. He's widely acclaimed. He's developing this advanced form of technology, basically time travel vacations. Essentially, he's developed the world's first prototype time machine. His father is so successful. I thought about people like Steve Jobs and Elan Musk and Bill Gates and what it would be like to be their children. I think when you're the son or daughter of somebody who's incredibly successful, you can feel inspired. You can feel like, you know, you want to prove yourself, you want to do better than them or like impress them. Or you can kind of retract into yourself and you can feel like nothing you do will ever be as impressive as them, so why even try? And that's where Tom is. I'm not saying I agree with that assessment, but that's where he is, feeling like, and his father doesn't help because he's imperious and arrogant and feels like his son is a disappointment, and he's absorbed that. And I think his mother, in this version of the world, has absorbed her own version of that. You know, she's lived in her husband's shadow because his work is so important. She hasn't really come into her own, and never has. And so the two of them kind of like exist just as these sort of like dull satellites of the bright star that is, you know, when he finds himself, because of an accident with this prototype time machine, stranded in our version of the world, he discovers a very different world. Not just a world, but a very different family dynamic. His father is a very different person. His mother is a very different person. He's a very different person. And so it makes him realize how much of who he is was based on circumstance, not some essential core identity. And that, I think, is an interesting question for all of us. I mean, you know, I'm telling you in the context of a story, but I like to think about how much of who I am that I think is essential to myself is truly like some sort of psychological or emotional core, and how much of it is circumstance, you know?
Because it seems like there was one line he said that, you know, the only thing I share with my father is the last name.
Right.
And it was so heartbreaking.
Yeah. That's how he feels in that version of the world. And so when he discovers a different kind of version of himself, I think it's like his whole identity is thrown into flux. Because, you know, if you spend your life blaming your father for the fact that you're not a success, well, what happens when you come to a version of the world where your father isn't a success?
So you have to look at yourself and what you're doing or not doing.
Yeah.
Your story rests on time travel and a pivotal date, July 11th, 1965.
Yeah.
What happened that day?
In this version of the world, there was a scientific experiment. A Danish-American scientist named Lionel Getrider discovered a form of unlimited clean energy. Basically, without going into too much engineering detail, he figured out a way to harness the rotation of the planet. You know, we think of a hydroelectric dam, right? The water going over a waterfall turns the turbines and creates electricity. Well, he figures out a way to do that with the whole planet. As we know, the planet's constantly rotating on its axis. It's constantly orbiting around the sun. He finds a way to harness that and creates unlimited clean energy. And that transforms society, not right away, but over time. I mean, it goes back to the question you had earlier. What happened? Why didn't we get this techno-utopian future? The more I thought about it, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it and reading about it, I realized it's fuel. You know, fuel is the problem. Putting aside whether you believe in climate change or any of that kind of stuff, fossil fuels, they're just actually not great fuel. require incredible resources to dig them out of the earth. They're very dirty, and then when you burn them, you don't actually get that much energy out of them. And so I thought a clean form of energy would have transformed society at a time in the mid-60s when the optimism and the sort of like a gung-ho kind of technological thrust of society hadn't been tarnished by the social revolutions, the cultural revolutions of the late 60s and 70s, the skepticism of authority, the suspicion of government, all the things that kind of curdled the way we see our world in the future. Had we discovered clean energy at that time, when we were still trying to get to the moon and believing we could do anything, it would have changed everything.
Do you think that now we're like, we don't think we can do anything?
I don't think that we don't think we can do anything. I think that we still have incredible technology that would seem like magic to people 50 years ago or 100 years ago. At the same time, I think a lot of people feel like they've been left behind and that they can never catch up, like the train has left the station. And whether it's the economic disparities or the class disparities or our inability to solve even very basic human conflicts, I think people do feel overwhelmed by it. Part of writing the book, I don't want it to just be this dewy-eyed, sort of like optimistic, like we can solve our problems, because that's not what the book is saying. The book is saying is we have real problems. When we pretend like everything is black and white and that there's yes, no answers to everything or simple solutions, we don't just delude ourselves, but we do a disservice, because it's only when we embrace the complexity of the problems that we're facing that we're actually going to be able to solve them. If you pretend like everything's easy, then you don't actually solve anything. You just keep adding Band-Aids, and the Band-Aids pile up and pile up.
It doesn't address why you need the Band-Aid in the first place.
That's right.
For me, anyway, the way I interpreted the novel, I noticed that there's a theme of grief, but because there's technology to help people deal with that grief. Like if you break up with somebody, there's technology that you can recreate that person, so you don't have to really acknowledge that they're gone. You can even marry somebody that looks a lot. Some of my ex-boyfriends date girls that look exactly like me, but whatever. So if you live in a world where all those...
See, I want to talk about that. I mean, let me hear more about that.
But if you live in a world where you're not even, you don't even have to figure out how to grieve, then how do you live?
Well, I mean, this is something that my main character, Tom, grapples with early in the book. I mean, though it's not giving too much away because it happens quite early in the book, but his mother dies quite suddenly, and it's an accident, and even though they live in this incredibly technologically advanced society, I mean, accidents still happen. And it throws him for a complete loop. It's something real. It's something that a robot or some sort of virtual generator can't fix. His mother's dead. And it sends him off on a series of decisions, even though he wouldn't say, oh, I did all this stuff because I was in mourning, because I was grieving, because the rug had been pulled out from underneath me, because my sense of emotional gravity had sort of gone off balance. But that's, to me, as the writer, how I felt. My mother passed away when I was in my mid-20s, when I was just turned 26. And, it changed the trajectory of my life. I mean, I hadn't been through a loss of that scale before. And not just me, but my family and where I lived and the professional and personal decisions I made. Like, I didn't necessarily realize it at the time, but it was a real hinge moment in my life where I was kind of going off on this way. And then when my mother died, it really sent me off in a completely different direction. And I can't go back and change that. I can only look sort of as an emotional archaeologist and see the decisions that I made and how they affected me. And I thought about that for my character as well. I mean, he makes a lot of very bad decisions in the book. But as a writer, the bad decisions are fun because they propel the plot and they kind of push him into doing things that he wouldn't normally do, which is interesting for the character. But as a person, I feel compassion for him because I know that he's gone through this loss. At the same time, it's not like the book is extremely heavy. It's a fun book, but I wanted to have that emotional weight underneath it of what happens when you lose, what happens when there's something that can't be fixed, when no matter how technologically advanced your society is, you can't fix losing a parent, losing a loved one, dealing with grief. There's no technological fix for it. When he finds himself, because of this accident, stranded in our version of the world, of course, for him, our world seems like a dystopia. And at first there's, I both have some fun and also kind of get some critical mileage out of his dismay at how everything's gone wrong in our version of the world. At the same time, what he discovers is a much more connected, loving family, and it's something he's never had before. And so he both yearns for it and also feels like he doesn't deserve it, because that's not the environment he's grown up in. And so my character Tom's sort of process of both seeing not just the bad things, but the good things about our world, and how much of that is about the connections between people, is part of his journey. You know, realizing that the connections between people, the people we love, the people, not just the families we're born into, but the families we make, that's what gives life meaning. That's what gives life purpose. That's how we find happiness. It isn't through our phones or a bigger television screen. I mean, this is a very sort of like obvious way of saying it. It's a much more emotional journey for him. But it's not just finding those connections, but believing that you deserve them.
And I think maybe the appeal of time travel for some people might be to go back and fix whatever it is that they are missing or their regrets.
Well, it's an essential human thing, isn't it? To want to go back, to look back and say, if only I'd done this differently, you know, or to get a second chance to fix our mistakes or errors or our regrets. I mean, I think it's an essential thing, because of course it's a thing we can't do. I think, although, and part of, I think, the fun for writing a novel is, when, you know, we think about these moments in our lives, oh, if only I'd done this differently, my whole life would be different. Everything would be different, everything would be better. But we always assume that we would be the same, right? Everything could be different, the entire world could be different, but we would be the same person. But that's just our human narcissism. Why would everything in the world be different, but we would be the same? No, you would be a different person as well, but it's so hard to imagine yourself as a different person.
Something that you do play on in the novel is gender roles in both versions of 2016. Can you explain how you did that? Sure.
I mean, part of this idea of a sort of like this consumerist utopia is I wanted to imagine it not just all the positive things about it, but this is very much a utopia as imagined by people in the 1950s. And gender roles were very different back then. So I like the idea of you could have a world where you had total gender equality at work, in life. There's nothing about gender that would hold you back. At the same time, people do still hold on to like regressive social models. And so it's not just Tom, it's the women in his life. It's everybody, like they're actually, even though they have all this possibility of equality, people embody sort of regressive gender roles in a way that he doesn't even question when he's there. It's only when he comes here and he lands in our world, and despite all the problems, it's like he can look back and say, oh, wait a minute, like I took all these things for granted because things were positive, that that I realized actually weren't. And so I wanted to create female characters, just like male characters, who are complicated, messy, vibrant, alive, but aren't just types, are people, you know? And people don't necessarily fall into just like the simple gender roles.
You write, people are despondent about the future because they're increasingly aware that we as a species chased an inspiring dream that led us to ruin. We told ourselves the world is here for us to control, so the better our technology, the better our control, the better our world will be. The fact that for every leap in technology, the world gets more sour and chaotic is deeply confusing. The better things we build keep making it worse. The belief that the world is here for humans to control is the philosophical bedrock of our civilization, but it's a mistaken belief. Optimism is the pyre on which we've been setting ourselves aflame. That's a pretty pessimistic view of technology, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a pessimistic view of technology. I would say it's a pessimistic view of what we think technology does. You know, technology is a tool. So as a tool, it's as useful or as damaging as whoever wields it. A big idea in the book is what I call the accident. That idea that every time you introduce a new kind of technology, you also introduce the accident of that technology. There's no such thing as a car accident before you invent the car. You know, there's no such thing as a plane crash until you invent the plane. And there's also small and big accidents. There's immediate accidents. So we invent the car, suddenly we have car crashes. But we also have urban sprawl. We also have climate change. These are things that come out of having a car. And so when we invent a piece of technology, we tend to have a very, very limited window. You know, think about the internet, and people get so excited. The internet, the entire, you know, all of human knowledge available to you at the click of a button. But it's also had the effect of reducing, of sort of evening out all knowledge. All information is equal on the internet. Fact or fiction becomes a matter of choice. It's subjective. You can decide from all the information that's available of all of human history, what you want to believe. And that effect of flattening out information where there is no objective reality, there's just what you want to believe, your subjectivity, we can see the effect that's having on our society and all different levels. That's the accident of the technology. And in fact, the internet hasn't been around long enough for even us to even know what the long-term effects of it are. And so for me, I'm not pessimistic about technology. It's like saying I'm pessimistic about a hammer. I'm not pessimistic about a hammer. I need a hammer to hang up, to like hang up a painting. But you could also hit somebody on the head with it, right? It's how you're using it. And so what I would like to do is to sort of just open people's perspective to be wider. I'm not writing an essay, I'm writing a book. And so I want to do it in an entertaining way. But hopefully by embodying these characters, I'm also asking these questions about, like, let's open our perspective. And so I don't think of it as pessimism. What I'm pessimistic about is, I think of myself as a realist. And I think people need to be realistic about just how much technology can really do. And when we think of the world as this playground that's under our control, how much we're deluding ourselves, because it's not.
And it's being turned into a movie?
Yes.
When is this?
Oh, I'm working on the screenplay right now. Yeah, Paramount Pictures has bought the rights to the movie. And so because my background is a screenwriter, it's like the F word, so I'm working on the script right now.
That's exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
How does it feel to have your first novel then turned into a movie?
Well, it's funny because, of course, when I started thinking about this idea, I thought about, no, this is a book. The way to tell this story is as a book. And it was a real departure for me. And it wasn't without its professional risks. Nobody was asking me to write a book. I had a career as a screenwriter, and so I spent a lot of time writing this book that at the time I didn't have a book deal or anything like that. And so it's sort of very gratifying that the movie business that I sort of stepped away from wants to turn this into a movie. At the same time, it's challenging as a writer because you have to think about, okay, I told the story in one way, how do I tell it in a completely other way? But the chance to reach other audiences with these characters that I love, but as well as the themes and messages of the book is obviously very appealing.
Elan, thank you so much for being here.
Oh.
You'll be back on the show later on in the summer. Yeah. Thank you so much for opening up our imagination.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was really delighted.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.